Welcome back, everyone. This is Capablanca Fonaroff Part 2. So after Fonaroff moves knight to d7, one thing that we see here is a distinct advantage Capablanca has in terms of the quality of his pieces. When you look at the pieces on just a piece-by-piece basis, you see that white has a great superiority of mobility. When you look at the queens, white has the queen on c3, queen on versus d8, this bishop, capable of great movement, capable of developing to multiple places on the king side. You have Capablanca's bishop, which is limited by d6. The knight, which is not forward, it's not influencing the center of the board, versus Capablanca's knight. And the rooks, which again are almost connected and can also lift and get over to the king side relatively quickly. So in that sense, after just the first few moves of this game, Capablanca already has this qualitative advantage of the pieces. But that advantage in chess is a temporary one. It's not a static advantage. So what Capablanca has to do is try to convert this short-term advantage into a long-term advantage. And he tries to do this by using this superiority of space and mobility to move his pieces over to the king side for an attack. So Capablanca plays knight to f5. Black plays bishop to f6, attacking the queen. And the queen moves queen to g3. This is an ideally placed position for the queen because it does a couple of things. Number one, yes, the bishop is defending g7 here, but if the bishop were to move, then white has mate in 1. So that's now a very serious weakness. In addition, this pawn is not just attacked once, but twice. It's attacked by the knight, and it's also attacked by the queen. And so the knight is just attacking all sorts of weak squares: h6, g7, e7, d6. And in the meantime, now black has to try to defend all of this at once. And so, because of that, we see the principle of what's called two weaknesses. If one side can create two weaknesses in the opponent's camp, then eventually the other side will not be able to defend all of these weaknesses at once. Now, nothing that black can do through simple defense, because it's attacked twice, so queen to e7 would not succeed, neither would bishop to e7, because then, of course, black would get mated on g7. So black finds the right plan. He plays knight to e5. Bishop to e5 also doesn't work. We can go through that line at the end if you'd like. But here's the line that we see already, and then Capablanca simply just keeps developing. He develops and puts the bishop on f4, now creates this battery, and responds by queen to c7. So now you see there's just a lot going on. There's a lot going on in the position for white. He's got this attack on g7. He's got this battery where now the queen has to be careful. And Capablanca finishes development with rook a to d1. So when you look at Capablanca's pieces, he's just very, very quickly gotten them all lockstep into attacking the center and maneuvering them to the king side. So white has really just done a very simple, straightforward, and direct organization of his pieces. Now black plays rook a to d1, and Capablanca sees an incredible possible combination, which black can defend if he defends it correctly, but he does not. So we'll look at Capablanca's beautiful combination utilizing a lot of these different factors. So it begins with rook takes d6. Now, on one hand, this is not a straightforward rook sacrifice because, as you see, the knight is also on d6. So if rook takes d6, knight takes d6, it's a pawn for a piece. So it's not really a rook sack, but Capablanca is actually after something else entirely. If you see black's best defense after rook takes rook, bishop takes bishop. Black actually has a strong defense, according to the computer, which is queen a5, which makes the rook movable again, because now queen is threatening rook e1 checkmate, which would then give black time to try to get his piece out of the way. So after bishop to c3, attacking the queen, bishop takes bishop, pawn takes pawn, rook to g6, knight to e7 check, king moves, knight takes g6, and then of course black would recapture. Most likely would recapture, I'm guessing, with the f-pawn. Now in this position, you see that white would have the advantage of a pawn, and the doubled pawns wouldn't be too bad because black has doubled pawns as well. I'm not sure which way black would capture back. On one hand, capturing to not expose the king seems to make sense, and also giving more scope to black's rook on the f-file. But at the same time, that also gives white a pass pawn on the e-file, so maybe taking this way is better. But that's black's best defense, and it's not always easy to see that whole defense out. I bet Capablanca saw it, but there are other moves other than this temporary sacrifice which Capablanca makes. One move that I think is very strong here, and Stockfish agrees, is actually h4. h4 is strong because what it prepares to do, it prepares bishop to g5 in order to try to get rid of that pesky f6 bishop in order to have a strong attack on the king side. So if g6, h5, and then maybe the rook comes out. And as you can see, white can have a very, very strong king side attack here. But Capablanca saw something different, and he saw some of the different ways in which it could go wrong for his opponent. So instead, Capablanca goes for this really spectacular temporary sacrifice. Rook takes rook, chip. And of course, what you can see is that these are double attacked, right? That you have the rook, which is double attacked by knight, bishop, and of course queen behind it. And the concern is that not only is it being attacked, but then after the capture, you also have the fork of the queen and the rook. So one concern might be, well, why can't he just take with the bishop? This is, this is a possible move, but there's a reason why this fails. The reason why this move fails, sorry about that, I accidentally flipped the board. The reason why this fails is precisely because once the queen recaptures on e5, the rook is still double attacked, knight and queen. And not only that, there's still the threat of checkmate on g7, which would still have to be addressed. If, say, black would try to offend with either rook to f6 or g6, that leaves the queen on c7 hanging, which means the best move then is pawn to f6, and then captures, and now white would be not just up a pawn, but also up a whole piece besides. So we've already looked at the queen a5, so let's now look at the text move, rook d1. It's not the worst move I've ever seen, because he's basically seeking to give the rook back, but by creating this back rank threat, black thinks he has time to get the piece back. And it's a really, really good idea on its face value, but now, once again, we see the real purpose for Capablanca's really deep thinking and the whole purpose behind the sacrifice in the first place. It's just this really beautiful idea. So as we noted before, we have this threat on g7. So because of that, the bishop has been throws into the square. In addition, we also have knight attacking on e7, knight attacking on h6, and we have this this thing here with the queen and bishop. So on one hand, if you're not familiar with this tactic, it can seem that black might even seem to be slightly better here. But what Capablanca has is a trick up his sleeve. He's aware that black has a potential back rank weakness, and he has a much more active piece on the d file. So this is a really beautiful tactic, so I'll see if you can find it. So feel free to pause the video so if you can see what white has beautifully in store. Okay, I hope you're able to find it. This is just an absolutely beautiful, beautiful sequence. Capablanca plays knight to h6 check. Now, the pawn on g7 is pinned, so the only legal move now is king to h8. And so because of this now, there's this beautiful fork and back rank sequence that Capablanca plays. He now plays queen takes bishop. Now, Fonaroff, if he takes the queen back, what he's done is he's created a forking scenario between the queen and the king on h8. And even though the rook is defending on f7, that would then take the rook off the back rank, leaving d8 vulnerable to white's rook. So queen takes queen, knight to f takes f7 check, and black resigns. Black resigns in light of the following. If rook captures, rook check, queen interpose, rook interpose, and checkmate. So, really, the best that black can hope for in this position, because he is in check, so he has to do something about it. So the only other legal move is king to g8, and then knight takes queen, and then white is up insurmountable amounts of material. He has two connected pass pawns in the center, as well as being up a whole knight. And so because of that, black resigns. In this whole game, Capablanca shows this remarkable ability just to get his pieces active and to make very simple and correct choices the whole game, and exploiting these different kinds of weaknesses. And, again, this is definitely a brilliancy played by the third world champion. And the thing is chess isn't half as simple as Capablanca makes it look, but he does show just how straightforward and logical chess can be when you understand these basic strategic principles and use them to great effect. So, I am Chess Teacher Tui. I want to wish you good luck with your chess, and this has been Capablanca Fonaroff, 1918, and goodbye for now.